Daniel Harper believed the night would be simple. Just another monthly poker game with friends, some laughter, and a chance to forget about work and responsibilities for a few hours. When he pulled his car into the driveway of his home in Portland, Oregon, the porch light glowed warmly through the cool evening air. Voices and laughter drifted from inside the house. It sounded lively, but Daniel felt strangely tired. Life had become routine lately. His job kept him busy, and his marriage to Emily had quietly lost its spark. They were not fighting, and nothing dramatic had happened. Instead, their relationship had slowly turned quiet. Conversations were often about bills, schedules, and errands. The playful energy they once shared had faded into something calm but distant. Daniel still cared deeply for Emily, but sometimes he wondered if they had both become too comfortable with silence. He stepped inside the house and was greeted by his friends who were already setting up the poker table in the dining room. Cards shuffled, chairs scraped across the floor, and the smell of freshly cooked food filled the air. Emily had clearly worked hard to prepare everything. As Daniel took off his jacket, his eyes moved toward the kitchen. That was when he noticed Margaret Collins. Margaret was Emily's mother. She had arrived earlier that day to help her daughter prepare for the gathering. She stood by the counter arranging small plates and snacks, moving with calm confidence. Her presence always brought a quiet sense of order to the room. Margaret was in her early 50s, graceful and thoughtful. She had a gentle smile and a warm voice that made people feel comfortable around her. Over the years, Daniel had grown to respect her deeply. She never forced advice on anyone, but when she spoke, her words carried wisdom. She noticed Daniel standing in the doorway and smiled. "Daniel," she said kindly, "you look like you survived another busy week." He laughed softly. "Barely." "Well," she replied, handing him a small plate of food. "Tonight you get to relax." Daniel thanked her and walked toward the dining table where his friends were gathering. The atmosphere quickly became loud and cheerful. Chips clinked together, cards shuffled, and friendly teasing filled the room. The poker nights had started years earlier as a way for Daniel and his friends to stay connected after college. Life had pulled them in different directions. But once a month, they met, played cards, and pretended for a few hours that nothing had changed. At first the game was serious, with everyone focused on winning. But after a couple of hours, drinks loosened the mood. Laughter grew louder, and the competition became playful instead of intense. That was when Ryan, Daniel's longtime friend, leaned back in his chair with a mischievous grin. "All right," Ryan said, raising his glass. "We need to make this more interesting." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "That usually means trouble." Ryan laughed. "Not trouble. Just a little fun. Whoever loses a round has to do a small dare." The table erupted with cheers and groans. Some players loved the idea immediately, while others pretended to protest before agreeing anyway. Emily rolled her eyes from the kitchen. "Just don't break anything. Relax," Ryan replied. "These are harmless dares." And at first they truly were harmless. One friend had to sing a ridiculous song in a dramatic voice. Another had to tell the most embarrassing story from college. Someone else had to send a funny message to their spouse. Each round filled the house with laughter. Daniel enjoyed watching the chaos, but eventually luck turned against him. He lost a hand. Ryan immediately clapped his hands. "We have a loser." Daniel sighed, shaking his head. "All right, what's the dare?" Ryan looked around the room, thinking for a moment. Then his smile grew wider. "Your dare," he said, pointing at Daniel, "is to hug the person in this house you talk to the least and give them a real compliment." The table burst into laughter again. Daniel stood slowly, pretending to act confident, but inside he felt oddly unsure. The dare sounded simple, but when he looked around the room, something unexpected happened. His friends were all people he spoke to often. Emily was busy at the sink washing dishes. Then his eyes landed on Margaret. She was standing quietly near the hallway, watching the game with a small smile. She had been enjoying the laughter without joining the noise. Technically, Ryan's rule made sense. Daniel probably spoke to her the least. But suddenly the dare didn't feel as simple. Still, everyone at the table was watching him, waiting. So Daniel walked toward her. Margaret noticed him approaching and looked curious. "Did you lose?" she asked lightly. "Unfortunately," Daniel admitted. "And now you're being punished." He laughed. "Something like that?" He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "The dare says I have to hug the person I talk to the least and give them a compliment." Margaret raised her eyebrows in amused surprise. "Well," she said, opening her arms gently, "I suppose I qualify." Daniel stepped forward and gave her a quick, polite hug. It should have lasted a second. Just a simple gesture to complete the dare. But in that brief moment, something unexpected happened. Margaret's embrace felt warm and reassuring, the way family hugs often do. Yet Daniel also felt a quiet emotional connection he hadn't expected. It was not romantic or inappropriate. It was simply comforting. When they stepped back, Daniel suddenly realized everyone at the table was waiting for the compliment. He searched for the right words. Instead of something playful, the truth slipped out. "You make people feel understood," he said sincerely. "You really listen to people. That's rare." For a moment, Margaret looked surprised. Then her smile softened. "Thank you, Daniel," she said quietly. Across the room, the poker players cheered and teased him dramatically, turning the moment into another joke. But for Daniel and Margaret, something subtle had shifted. Not a boundary, not a mistake. Just awareness. Later that evening, the game ended and guests began gathering their coats. One by one, they left, still laughing about the night's dares. Rain had started falling outside, tapping softly against the windows. Emily went upstairs early, exhausted from hosting the gathering. She kissed Daniel goodnight and promised to finish cleaning in the morning. Daniel stayed in the kitchen to wash the remaining dishes. A few minutes later, Margaret quietly joined him with a towel. "I'll dry," she said. They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a while. The kitchen felt calm now that the house was quiet. After a moment, Margaret spoke gently. "You and Emily both look tired lately." Daniel hesitated before answering. "We've just been busy," he said. Margaret nodded slowly. She seemed to understand there was more behind his words. "Marriage has seasons," she said thoughtfully. "Some seasons feel colder than others." Daniel looked at her. "That's a good way to describe it." She continued drying the dishes, speaking carefully. "When my husband and I started drifting apart years ago, the hardest part wasn't anger," she said softly. "It was feeling invisible." The word caught Daniel's attention. Invisible. That was exactly how he had been feeling, though he had never said it aloud before. He looked at Margaret, realizing she understood something very personal about him. Their eyes met briefly, and a quiet moment passed between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Thunder rumbled faintly outside as the rain grew heavier. Eventually, the dishes were finished, and Margaret picked up her coat from the chair. "Thank you for the ride earlier today," she said. "Any time," Daniel replied. She walked toward the front door, then paused. "Good night, Daniel. Good night." He watched her step outside into the rain and walk toward her car. For a long moment, Daniel stood in the doorway thinking about the evening. Nothing dramatic had happened. It was just a poker game, a dare, a simple hug. Yet something about the night stayed with him. Not because of what occurred, but because of what it revealed. For the first time in a long while, Daniel had felt truly seen by someone who understood the quiet struggles people often hide behind polite smiles. As he turned off the lights and headed upstairs, he told himself the feeling would fade by morning. But deep down, sensed that the small moment created by a harmless poker dare might have started something far more complicated. And he had no idea where those emotions might lead next. Weeks passed after poker night, but Daniel Harper noticed that something inside him had quietly changed. Life returned to its normal rhythm: work meetings, grocery runs, shared dinners, and weekend errands. Yet he felt more aware of his emotions than before. Nothing inappropriate had happened that evening, and he reminded himself of that often. Still, the brief moment of honesty he had shared with Margaret stayed in his thoughts. Not as guilt, but as a mirror showing him feelings he had ignored for too long. His marriage with Emily continued peacefully on the surface. But Daniel began noticing the small gaps between them more clearly. They moved around each other like polite roommates, cooperating but rarely connecting. Emily was kind and hardworking, focused on her career and responsibilities. Daniel respected her deeply, yet he realized they had stopped sharing their inner worlds. Conversations ended quickly, replaced by phones, television, or exhaustion. One Sunday afternoon, the family gathered for dinner at Emily and Daniel's house. Margaret arrived carrying homemade dessert, greeting everyone with her usual warmth. Daniel noticed how naturally she made people feel comfortable. She listened carefully when Emily talked about work stress and laughed easily at small jokes. Watching her interact with others made Daniel reflect on how powerful simple attention could be. During dinner, nothing unusual happened. They talked about travel plans, news stories, and neighborhood updates. Still, Daniel caught himself observing Margaret's calm presence. She seemed peaceful, but carried a quiet loneliness behind her smile, something only noticeable if one looked closely. It reminded him of how she had described feeling invisible years earlier. After dinner, Emily received a work call and stepped into another room. Margaret began gathering plates, but Daniel stopped her. "You've done enough," he said. "I'll handle it." She smiled. Old habits are hard to break. They worked together anyway, moving naturally around the kitchen. The conversation stayed light at first, but Margaret eventually asked, "Have things been better lately?" Daniel paused before answering. He appreciated her careful way of asking questions without pressure. "I'm trying to understand things more," he said honestly. "About myself, mostly." "That's never easy," she replied gently. Her words felt supportive, not intrusive. Daniel realized that talking to her felt effortless because she never rushed him or judged his thoughts. Later that evening, Emily felt tired and asked Daniel if he could drive Margaret home since it was already dark. He agreed without hesitation. The drive was quiet. Streetlights reflected across wet roads as soft music played in the background. For several minutes, neither spoke, yet the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Margaret looked out the window before speaking. "You seem thoughtful lately." Daniel smiled slightly. "I guess I've been thinking about where life is going." "That usually means something inside you wants change," she said. Her words were calm, but they reached him deeply. "I don't want to lose what I have," Daniel admitted. "I just don't know how to fix the distance I feel sometimes." Margaret nodded slowly. Distance doesn't appear suddenly. It grows when people stop sharing small truths. Daniel considered that carefully. He realized how often he avoided deeper conversations with Emily because he feared conflict or discomfort. When they arrived at Margaret's house, rain began falling again, soft but steady. Daniel walked her to the porch to make sure she got inside safely. As she stepped onto the wet stairs, her foot slipped slightly. Instinctively, Daniel reached forward and caught her before she lost balance. For a brief moment, she remained in his arms. Time seemed to pause. There was no rush of excitement, no dramatic emotion, only the realization that both of them understood each other's loneliness. Margaret gently stepped back, creating space between them. Her expression was calm, but serious. "This is where people can make mistakes," she said quietly. Daniel understood immediately. She wasn't accusing him. She was protecting both of them. "I know," he replied. The moment brought clarity rather than confusion. Daniel realized the connection he felt was not about romance. It was about feeling heard during a time when he felt disconnected from his own life. He took a slow breath. "I think I've been looking outside my marriage for answers instead of facing what's missing inside it." Margaret's eyes softened with approval. Recognizing that takes courage. They stood quietly as rain tapped against the porch roof. "Feelings themselves aren't wrong," she continued gently. "But choices matter, especially when family is involved." Daniel nodded. In that moment, he felt grateful rather than tempted. The situation showed him something important about himself, that he missed emotional closeness, not excitement or escape. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "For what?" "For being honest," Margaret smiled faintly. "Sometimes honesty is the kindest thing we can give each other." She stepped inside her home and turned back before closing the door. "Go home, Daniel. Talk to your wife. The advice stayed with him during the entire drive back. That night, Daniel sat beside Emily on the couch after she finished her work emails. Normally, they would watch television quietly, but instead, he turned toward her. "Can we talk?" he asked. Emily looked surprised but nodded. The conversation started slowly. Daniel spoke carefully, explaining that he felt distant and missed the closeness they once shared. He avoided blame, focusing instead on his own feelings. Emily listened quietly at first, then admitted she had felt the same way but assumed Daniel was satisfied with how things were. They talked for hours about stress, expectations, and how adulthood had slowly replaced romance with routine. Some moments were emotional, and Emily wiped away tears more than once. But there was relief in finally speaking openly. For the first time in months, they truly listened to each other. They agreed to make small changes, shared walks after dinner, weekly date nights without phones, and honest conversations even when life felt busy. The changes were not dramatic, but they were real. Over the following weeks, Daniel noticed warmth returning to their relationship. They laughed more. They asked deeper questions. Even simple moments, cooking together or sitting on the porch, felt meaningful.